Welcome to the Legal Talk podcast. My name is Claire Linwood and I'm a product manager at LexisNexis Asia and Pacific. The rise of generative AI in the past 18 months or so has really brought AI, and more specifically generative AI, to the forefront of legal practice. Here at LexisNexis in Australia, we're excited to be introducing the commercial preview of our new generative AI solution, Lexis Plus AI. Earlier this month, I caught up with our Managing Director, Greg Dickason, to chat all things AI and some of the questions that can come up on a firm or legal department's AI journey. Let's get into it. Greg, I'll start with a question for you. I'm sure there are many people across the legal landscape, lawyers and legal ops professionals, who are wondering whether and why they should invest in AI products. There's an enormous amount of AI hype at the moment, particularly around generative AI. It's also a time of pretty tight budgets. So choosing a solution that's usable and that will have the desired ROI is really critical. What would you say should be top of mind for decision makers as they take some steps on the AI journey?
So it's such a good question, and it's such a, you think about any new technology, and I know a lot of our legal practitioners out there, especially legal ops people, they've seen so much in the last 10 years. AI has been there, and they're talking about workflow tools, and there's always these things coming along, and tech's always threatening to disrupt law. And so the question is, why is this any different from last year's fad or the year before? And we heard, for example, blockchain. I'm a mad blockchain fan, but I don't think blockchain really is that relevant in the legal world. And we had smart contracts and all the rest. And I'm just saying that just to ground you in the fact that I actually think this is different. This is fundamentally different. And not only do I think it's different, as you know, Claire, the whole of LexisNexis has pivoted. This is a big focus for us globally. This is where we're putting most of our investment, because we do think that law is going to fundamentally change in the next couple of years as generative AI gets used. So that's just the wider context. When it comes to like what should be top of mind for decision makers, I think it's a case of how can you learn and how can you get your business ready, your legal business ready, so that you can be quite adaptable, because this is a rapidly changing world. Like we've just gone through an AI conference, which I think was in December last year, and as you probably remember, that the GPT-4 Turbo came out, and suddenly a bunch of things that we didn't think were going to happen happened. But it's only a year since ChatGPT came out, so in the last year, the number of changes have been phenomenal. So back to what do you do as a legal ops person or as a managing partner? First and foremost, I think, is make sure that you're culturally ready, that your team is ready, that they're understanding, and that you're really conversant with the main topics of what generative AI is about, because that means you can ask the right questions about how it's going to affect your business.
That's a great point, Greg. Just to go back to your point about why is this any different? Why is Gen AI different from all the AI products that have come before? And also things like that promise to be groundbreaking, but perhaps haven't had the same ROI or the same applications as other technologies, for example. So blockchain is a great example. I'm not so much a fan of blockchain as you are. I think it's often a technology in search of a use case, but I would agree that generative AI is something like, I think Bill Gates made the point of, it's like mobile computing, it's like the internet, it's something that's fundamentally a game changer. And we'll think back to when ChatGPT was released and think that at that point changed the game completely. And after that, nothing was ever quite the same. I would agree that's the case. And I think we've seen that in the legal landscape as well, though there's been a lot of attention on generative AI in a way that really wasn't there for previous AI products that had more specific use cases or applications. I also love the point about being culturally ready as a firm or an organization being one of the key things that leaders can do. And I think leaders in particular are the people who are best placed to do that, because it needs to come from the top to make the whole organization ready. And that leads into one of the points that I would make about what should decision makers consider doing when they're introducing Gen AI into their business. And I think one of those things is just getting as many people involved as possible from across different functions. So of course, in a law firm, it's not just lawyers. There are different levels of seniority of lawyers. There are people in different practice areas. There's marketing, there's operations. So getting as many of those people involved as possible to get a kind of cross-functional view of what AI can do for a law firm. It's not just about the law in particular, it's about a whole range of different functions.
That's true. And also when you look at sort of those general functions like marketing, a good example, you can go out wider and see what is happening in the wider market. And there's a lot of companies that are rolling out marketing specific solutions as an example. And that way you teaching a business culturally, but one part of it is learning. So yeah, completely agree. Yeah. And then the other point I think I made was about also know the key bits. So there's lots of really good courses out there, short courses that are not technical, that really help you understand how Gen AI, the fundamentals of Gen AI. So I think of things like prompt engineering and RAG, which is really how you can search and surface your own documents into your large language model. Those things are important just to understand what they are, because that helps you understand what's good and what's not good and how you can make a model work for yourself.
Absolutely. And I think prompt engineering in particular is one of those areas that could actually really appeal to lawyers because it's about natural language. Like I suspect, and maybe I'm just projecting, a lot of lawyers have a bit of a phobia of numbers and maths and engineering, not all, but some. So if you can get involved in a seemingly non-technical skill like prompt engineering, which really leverages reasoning capacities, language capacities that are really strong in lawyers, then you can leverage that skill set to really get the most out of generative AI as well. So I think we've kind of come to this point where language abilities are really important in interfacing with technology that we haven't had before.
And that's and to your point, that is a lawyer's core skill, is how can you clearly articulate what you need in a way that's unambiguous. And that's exactly what a good prompt is in a prompt engineering world, where you want the model to produce something, but you don't want it to do other things, to hallucinate, for example. And so a really well written prompt, the lawyer is very well skilled. Their skill set can be very well applied to creating a good prompt. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple of terms just now. One of them was RAG and one of them was hallucination. First, could you talk a little bit about what RAG or RAG is?
So RAG is retrieval augmented generation. What it really means is that when you're generating your output, so you is the model, is the generative AI model. So whether it's ChatGPT or say Anthropic's Claude or one of those, that model normally is quite generally trained. It's trained across the whole internet. Now, then you can specifically train it through tuning, and we can talk about that in a bit. But then once you've got it to that point, you now have a model which is reasonably intelligent, but maybe it's not focused on exactly where you want to focus it on a particular document, a particular set of documents, or maybe because it's been trained a couple of months ago, it's not even up to date. So a really good way to get that model to give you the best content, the best output, is to give it the right content as part of your query and say, use this set as part of your answer back to me. And RAG is a big part of that. So RAG, retrieval augmented generation, either it goes and does the search for you against the database, LexisNexis, we do that, or potentially you're uploading because you already know these are the most relevant documents. And so it's about making sure you've got the most relevant input facts to say, weight your answer based on these. It doesn't mean it doesn't only uses those documents, but often those are the core documents that it responds back to you. And so if you're thinking about a large language model, there's three ways in which you make it work very effectively for you. The one is tuning it, which can be very expensive, but that's where you make it understand your domain very effectively. The second is RAG, making it get the most relevant documents. That also can require a lot of engineering if it's search-based, for example, but it can also be just pointing it at the right content sets. And the final thing is that prompt engineering, which is telling it exactly how you want it to respond. And a big part of that is the hallucination side, which you brought up. So hallucinations are exactly what the name is on the tin. It's where a model actually makes up something. And you've probably all seen the example of the New York lawyer where there were hallucinated citations for court cases that hadn't happened. But in general, even in far less extreme examples, large language models will typically make up things in their answers. But in a prompt engineering way, you can actually very much tighten up their response. And especially if you've got the RAG and the tuning, you can say, give me the answer to this question. Do not elaborate. You literally tell it, do not elaborate, and only focus your answer on these particular aspects. And that way you can reduce hallucinations. I can't say you'll ever eliminate them, but you can significantly reduce them.
Some of those prompt engineering techniques are so interesting. Actually, I've seen some research that showed that actually prompting a large language model to take a deep breath before it reasoned through a problem step by step actually improved the output of the model. So
it's pretty amazing.
I don't know why that is, but it's pretty amazing.
For the times it should be, I'm a machine. I don't take deep breaths.
Yeah, that would be a more rational response, but some of that research.
Yeah, I read one where they said if they put their instruction that do not add extra, but the do not was in capital letters, that actually made a difference. So even capitalizing it.
So it just goes back to that kind of iterative nature of the prompt engineering process. It's not just one prompt and then you're done. It's really a process of kind of experimenting with different prompts to see what kind of output.
And that's such a good point that you make there. And it's why you really want more of your people playing with these models and understanding them. Is the first time you operate, it looks amazing and it's so exciting. The second and third times you start to think, hang on, there's a lot of deficits here. These things aren't as good as they are. But then if you go through the prompt engineering side, you realize you can significantly improve the answer just by how you answer the question. And a lot of that, as you're saying, is through iteration. The first time you ask, modify, and you end up with a really good prompt.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to go back to kind of legal use cases and RAG and also the work that we're doing here at LexisNexis. So we've talked about hallucinations, we've talked about retrieval augmented generation, and I want to make probably the obvious point that it's really important for legal use cases in particular, like drafting and summarization and research, that large language model output is as accurate and comprehensive as possible. There's, I would say, it's inarguable that there needs to be more accuracy and more comprehensiveness than for something that is a kind of open LLM that can be used for many different things. And I think that's probably the case for any specialized domain like medicine or anything like that. It is really important that the output be accurate. I just want to go back to how RAG kind of works to ensure that. You've already touched on it, but
and this is where I'll put on my LexisNexis bragging hat for a second, because I think we're worth a brag or two. We spent years and years making sure our search is as effective as possible, making sure we do relevance ranking and we really give you, the user, the best set of responses to your query. And that now is really helping us with the model. So we've been tuning our own models, multiple models, but then the RAG part, I think, is one of the key differentiators we have over other players. And that what we're doing is we're saying we can actually give you the most relevant documents in that particular query. We can understand your query very effectively. We understand your search, and then we can give you the most relevant documents, which is where RAG comes in. And so that retrieval augmented generation, we're very good at the retrieval. And that's 5, 6, 7 years of using other AI models and having lots of human input in terms of relevance ranking and saying this is a better search than that one. And we've been doing that for thousands of man years, people years working on it. So that, I think, is a big part of the reason why our solutions, or generative AI solutions, are so good, because we're giving the most relevant documents. Of course, the other side is that these models are static in time. So, we might have tuned a model, but it's only tuned as of, say, March this year or last year. We're in January now. What happens then in the next 9 months? Well, the model doesn't have to keep being tuned. What's more important is, can we give it the most relevant documents, which may be completely up to date? So if a new case has come in overnight, it's in our search engine, it's been properly indexed, and so it can be surfaced to the model and therefore used by the model in the response to the user. So they know that it's up-to-date content, which I think is super important. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that goes back to what we were discussing earlier, which is how do decision makers in firms and organizations actually make these decisions, or in circumstances where there's a lot of hype, there are a lot of providers. And something that I wanted to touch on was, in those circumstances, as the decision maker, what do you ask a vendor or a provider? And I think one of those things is basic questions like, is there a cutoff date for the model that you're using? What kind of models are you using? What have you done to train this model? Do you have a view on that kind of what are the most important questions or areas to focus on when you're interacting with a potential provider?
Yeah, so there's that side, which is very much the technical strength of the model. So how well has it been built? How specific is it to your use cases? So for example, you can go and get GPT-4 Turbo, which is the OpenAI model. It's a phenomenal general purpose model, as they call foundational model, but it hasn't been tuned. So what does the tuning mean? And then you can get different technical answers on how much better it is at providing legal responses. And I would be asking those questions. The other side, of course, is the compliance, data sovereignty, data security side, and making sure that the documents you put into the model, if you do, or the interactions you have with the model, particularly if it's drafting things for you and it's got context around a particular matter you're working on, that data is well managed and purged, etc. Right? So if you go in and say, and this use case is real, you go in and say to the large language model, I'm working with this client, this is my particular matter, this is the circumstances, can you do some legal research for me? You've already given actually a lot of information about your particular matter to the model to get the best possible outcome and potentially then get the model to draft something for you. You better make sure that the model's managing your data very effectively and that there's security and confidentiality and all of those things are done. Also, the other question is, do you know that the content that's been produced you have rights to use? So when you're working with us, for example, we've gone and made sure we've got all the copyright and everything else so that we're giving you very comprehensive answers, but also those answers are grounded that you can use them and then that you have no concerns about how and what you do with the content that's been produced. And as lawyers, I'm sure, have been following, the New York Times has just sued OpenAI and Microsoft around potential copyright infringements, and that's obviously something that you don't want to be involved in.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's a very interesting area for intellectual property lawyers in particular. I don't want to go too off topic, but it's just, really something that's completely new and kind of a frontier. Can the law that already exists manage that? And if so, how? And I think this OpenAI New York Times kind of test case will be a really interesting test of that.
Yes. And it's that evolution. I mean, it was the same with the search engines years ago where they were also sued, but agreed, we don't want to go too far off. But, there's a lot of learning that's taking huge amount of human input. It's almost been taken for granted. These models that haven't come out of nowhere, they've learned off the internet.
Yep.
And in some cases, they've learned off proprietary content. And that's probably the other side of that is where's that core content being created, being that the model is using, where's it coming from? Because you can get really good models and you can even potentially tune them, although they might be quite expensive. But the content that they use in the tuning and the content they use in the response, how well has that been marked up? How well has that been curated? How well has that been set up for them to use? And so taking a step back, if you're a managing partner or head of legal operations or anything else, and you want to use large language models on your own content, which you absolutely should be exploring, you're going to have to go back to the whole data maturity model. And have you got a good data maturity model? Do you know where your content is? Do you know what the permissions are around your content? How well is it surfaced and indexed by search engines, for internal search engines? Because those large language models, how are you going to point them to the right content? So there's a lot of foundational work you have to do to get those models to work internally. And if you haven't done that, and I'm sure you've heard from lots of data experts, this is what you should be doing with your data, well, you're still going to have to do it with large language models. But I would say us as a business, we've done that work for our own content. And that's why we can provide very, very robust answers, not only because we've got the best models, but I also think because we've got the content set up in the most accessible way to those models.
And that goes back to kind of the basic data science point, is the model only being able to be as good as its underlying data or underlying training content. So you could have a very sophisticated model, but if the content and the data is not there, then you won't get the output that you want. Yeah. And I think that obviously content is the heart of everything that we do here at LexisNexis, or much of what we do. And we've got a phenomenal base of content that has been worked on over many years. So it's a great foundation for what we're doing with AI.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to the question you asked, what kind of questions should you be asking of your vendor? I would add a few more, right? So asking about how is your data being used to train their model? Ideally, you don't want to see that. And for example, with OpenAI, in the ChatGPT sense, any interactions you have with ChatGPT could be used to train the model, and they're not guaranteeing that they won't. But if you go and sign up to ChatGPT in Microsoft Azure, it's not. So understanding the terms and conditions makes a big difference in terms of what you're doing with your data. Goes without saying that we don't, in our side, in the sense of user data. And that also comes down to privacy. How is your data treated? And then the other side, of course, which we're talking about, which is tuning, which is how well does the model understand legal terms, and does it actually understand things like different legal domains, different practice areas?
Great point. And I'd like to touch on one thing, which is a definition. It's quite a basic thing, but the definition of use case, because we've been using that term quite a lot, and I think it's become more and more kind of popular, even in kind of legal circles recently. It's something that I didn't hear until I became a product manager, but it's become, I think more used. Maybe I'm biased, but I wanted to talk about what is a use case, and what is a use case in a law firm, maybe what's one in a legal operations sense. Could you speak a little bit about the meaning of use case and what's an AI use case?
So for me, a use case is something that if you do, for example, a study on a person's day and what they're doing, we have a thing called a jobs to be done framework. That's an example. In their day, they'll have to get a whole bunch of things done. And you as a lawyer, for example, one of those things, as an example, could be research. And you need to do research. And then you will use a product to fulfill a particular job. Let's say you need to understand the current treatment of a particular matter, or the way in which a particular act is being interpreted in a particular context. The use case then is at a product level, is how is the product used to achieve that outcome. That's the way I think of it, and I also have a product background. And you're a brilliant product manager, by the way. I was going to say, pop that on the side, but and so for me, that what comes on the side there is that so the use case is I will use this particular product to achieve this outcome. That's the use case. And so for a large language model, your use cases could be things like, I need to draft a letter to my client. So that is a use case of the product that is part of the framework of what actually a lawyer needs to do in their day, what a particular user of your product needs to do in a day. So I need to draft a letter, or I need to understand the context of the legal landscape around a particular provision of an act, as an example. And then there'd be another use case. I then need to draft a letter or draft a memo, or I need to compare an argument. So those are all different use cases. So what we've done in our product development is understood what we think are the primary use cases of our product in the wider framework of what lawyers need to do. And we sort of highlighted those in, if you like, categories of use cases, which is the search use case, which really is a research use case, the summarize use case, which is understanding all the stuff you've done and understanding, have you got enough? So really summarizing that, which I think is very important, because one of the biggest things in a research journey is, when do you know when you've finished research? And summarizing really helps that. So you can search and get what you need to, but then summarize what you've got, and does it give you or do you need to keep going for a while? And then, of course, the draft, which is the output post your research. Yep.
Thanks. That was a really great description. Actually, I struggled for a while when I became a product manager to really grasp the content of a use case, and that was really helpful. And I think for decision makers thinking about implementing AI in workflows for lawyers in their firm or their organization, it's kind of important to grasp at a quite granular level what is that use case that you're trying to do, because in that way you'll be able to evaluate and judge the product or the AI that you're using, and also work on things like prompt engineering.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also it comes back to the value that you expect to get out. So if you've got the use case, and you understand what it's about, so you understand actually in this day, for example, research use case, they should get an answer that is acceptable and is high enough quality in 20 minutes, because that's all the time that we can afford, because we have so many matters per day, etc. And that then can highlight your use case. There's the framework in which you're going to judge the use case and how well the product can live up to it.
Yeah, precisely. Greg, thank you so much for your time. I always enjoy talking AI with you, so thank you. For those listening, please do sign up for our LexisNexis AI Insider program. We'll provide the link, and you can get exclusive news, events, and information about AI and about Lexis Plus AI. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Great to be here.
Thanks, Greg.